All right, guys, we just want to welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick are around 2024 preview and prediction for the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Coaching staff stays in place from last season. Joey McGuire, 15 and 11 through 2 seasons. Zach Kitley and Tim DeRuyter will be in their third year each in their specific coordinator roles. Biggest headlines here: 26th ranked recruiting class. Very impressive work by McGuire and staff. And then 3 straight bowl games for the first time since the Pirate Mike Leach was in town. Looking at this offense, this is a unit that was all right. 27 points per game, had some respectable balance. But you turn ahead to 2024. Kitley's obviously a young, bright mind in college football when it comes to calling offenses. He returns 5 starters, and Brent Morton's going to take over at quarterback. He was a solid player, didn't exactly show great pace or depth on his downfield throws, had 6 interceptions over the last 4 games. Added redshirt sophomore Cameron Brown from West Georgia. Didn't set the world on fire through the air, but has some legit upside as an explosive runner who was productive last season. And then third stringer Jake Strong started 2 games. Had 6 interceptions, was awful in those appearances. I think, obviously, Nick, Texas Tech has always been known for having a great offense. Certainly not up to Cliff Kingsbury-type standards right now. Kitley can get them to that level, though, but I don't think it's going to happen with these quarterbacks.
This is an offense that needs to figure out what they're going to get out of their quarterback play. Last year, their quarterback play was hit or miss at time. This offense was very middle of the road last year, right? In the 60s in basically every category of the nation. So about, average in terms of offense. Their pass yards is 224 yards per game, which is not a terrible number, 64th in the nation, but they really want to find a way to raise that number. And now they're going to give the keys to Morton. They had Tyler Shaw, who transferred out. Jake Strong got some reps here and there. He wasn't very good. And Morton looks to be the guy stepping up and taking over the reins at quarterback. I want to see what he looks like this year for this team. 62% comp rate last year, 1,700 yards passing, 15 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Again, about as average as it gets, right? This is just an average quarterback. The quarterback play was extremely average. You have a very strong offensive coordinator here, one of the guys that's a bright mind in the sport. Is he going to be able to figure out how to get more of his quarterbacks? I'm not entirely sure. I feel like this team's a little capped with the quarterback play they have right now.
It's certainly possible. Morton comes out and throws for 40 touchdowns, 4,000 yards. That's certainly maybe on the table. I'm just not seeing it right now. You look at the running game led by Taj Brooks, 1,500 yards, 10 touchdowns on the ground last season. Just a magnificent player. Nice, dense frame, showcased great effort and power. Big yards after catch ability, or after carry ability, that is. Contact, that is, sorry. His acceleration and short area quickness aren't all that pristine, but he can be a nice short area red zone type of runner with that aforementioned power. Obviously behind him, Cameron Valdez wasn't a bad backup. Only had a couple touches all year. And then Cameron Dickey, a 3-star that might get on the field as a true freshman. This is going to be Brooks' backfield, Nick. He's going to be a workhorse this year. What do you make of it?
This is a running back who's incredible. I think this is a guy that's really, really solid speed, nice footwork, and going to continue to lead for this back room. He was incredible last year. 1,500 yards rushing, 5.3 yards per carry, and 10 scores. He could easily get above that double-digit touchdown mark again this year. I think you're going to have to pound the rock with him. Again, he's really good, one of the nation's best backs. Nice speed, good footwork, top to bottom. I really think he has a lot of a skill set to work with here. They do have a decent backup option as well, a little further down the depth chart in Cameron Valdez, who I think is not a bad number 2 at all either. I think it's a nice 1-2 punch with him leading the way here. This is a really solid back that I think, when you return 1,500 yards of production, obviously you can't be really complaining about that. That's a lot of solid production that Texas Tech returns this year out of their running back room. I think it's a really good start for this offense that they can rely on a solid back with a nice frame in Taj Brooks.
Now you look at the wide receiver room. Coy Aiken figures to be a strong X after an impressive freshman season at 6'2", 210. Dre McCray didn't end up having the impact I thought he would. Only 255 yards on 48 targets from Austin, PA. Should still contend for time in the slot and is a great kick returner. 28 yards per return last year and a touchdown. Josh Kelly, good add from Fresno State. Good amount of versatility to his name. Has been a good outside wide receiver in his career, though. Caleb Douglas showed some impressive hands at times at Florida. I think he can be a good player for them. Jordan Brown got on the field frequently as well. Good wide receiver here for this scheme. Plenty of different guys that can put up some respectable production. And, that goes without mentioning Micah Hudson, Nick, a dynamic, high-volume, 5-star recruit who's a dangerous, versatile athlete who should thrive this season. I mean, that's a big reason why they had a top 30 recruiting class, is Hudson being able to come over here. And obviously, this is a guy who could have went anywhere in the country, and he settles on the Red Raiders. I mean, that just speaks volumes what the staff is able to accomplish. And I think he's going to certainly see a lot of opportunities this year, because if you don't, you run the risk of losing him to other in-state teams like the Longhorns. And I just don't think that's something they're going to risk. And this guy is going to have a lot of targets.
Micah Hudson's an incredible player, a 5-star recruit out of Temple, Texas, stays in the state of Texas. A lot of suitors for him in that state. 6 foot, 195. He's number 5 wide receiver in the class of 2024, number 4 player in the state of Texas, and a top 25 player nationally. A&M was big on him for sure. They wanted him. He's a guy they were trying to get. Texas, they wanted him as well. Some other programs in the state, but it was mainly those two, A&M and Texas Texas Tech ends up beating them out for Hudson's signature, and he comes in here as a true freshman who can really be a dynamic player. I really think he's going to be a strong player in the slot, a guy that has a ton of athletic ability, a really incredible player to watch out of high school who's going to step up in here and be a starter on day one. Want to see a lot of targets of him. Coy Eakin, I like him, 416 yards receiving, 11.6 yards per grab, and 2 scores for him. Solid numbers. Jordan Brown, 256 yards receiving, 11.6 yards per grab, and 1 score for him. Dre McCray, 255, 8.8, and 2 scores. And then Mason Tharp, a tight end as well, 178 yards receiving, 9.9 yards per grab, and 4 scores. A nice red zone threat tight end there. I like what this wide receiving room has. I think there's some solid pieces here, plus plugging in a really high-end 5-star. Looks good on paper.
Yeah, and Temple, Texas is right in between Waco, Austin, and College Station. I mean, they really had to go into enemy territory to pluck this guy out. Great addition there for this receiving core. Look at the offensive line. They lose a good left side, but they had Sterling Porcher, who was quite bad for Middle Tennessee, but has started the last 2 years. Vinny Scurry was a phenomenal left guard for Toledo, coming off his best season yet. Love that addition. Redshirt sophomore Sheridan Wilson will step into a starting center role. Davian Carter, who transfers in from Memphis, might make a stake for that role, being an elite right guard for Memphis the last 2 seasons, especially in pass protection. Another good add there. Caleb Rogers was a quite sound right tackle for them. Likely he's going to move to right guard. If that's the case, that being Carter as the center, opening the door for Ty Buchanan, who was pretty perfect in the bowl game at left tackle, to potentially start full-time at right tackle. More great recruiting work here, Nick, and these 2 interior linemen, Carter and Scurry. These guys also probably had some pretty respectable suitors. They slot right into this Red Raiders offense, figuring to make an impact.
I like what this offensive line adds can do on that left side. I think there's 2 solid pieces that they add that could be really good for this team. Porcher, he's a decent add. Wasn't fantastic Middle Tennessee State, but a guy you bring in, and Scurry from Toledo. That's a huge add. A guy that's a really solid player at left guard. I like what he can do physically, a really strong piece. They return a right side that has some solid players. Caleb Rogers, Ty Buchanan are 2 solid players, as well as Sheridan Wilson at center, who's a younger player but got some good snaps last year. This offensive line is continuing to progress, and I like the progress they're putting together.
Looking at the offensive verdict, the Red Raiders offense has some really good players in Brooks, Aiken, and likely Hudson. But other than that, the supporting cast isn't all that fulfilling, which is, fine in the scheme. But the quarterback play needs to improve big time, as Morton should be much better for a whole offseason to work. Well, the O-line should take a step forward. Always high upside with Kitley. But this unit may be stagnant versus tougher opponents, kind of like it was last year. Nick, what are the final thoughts for you on this offense where, the ceiling could always be exceeded when it comes to guys like Kitley who run this type of scheme? But right now at quarterback is just pushing me a little bit too low to think that they can really explode. But if they do, we're probably not going to be shocked. What's your opinion?
We've seen Texas Tech have a lot of success on offense in previous regimes. I think they have a great coordinator here in Kitley, who's a really young, great mind in the sport, who's developing a strong offense. Some of the pieces are not quite there yet, but bringing in a 5-star receiver as well as 2 strong portal ads at left tackle and left guard really do bode well. A really solid back there return in Brooks. I feel like this offense will be more of the same next year, but I think they're heading towards that direction of continuing to put together a really strong offense.
Looking at the defensive side of the ball, this is probably the best I've ever seen Texas Tech on defense, at least in a long time. 26 points per game, outside, inside the top 100 in numerous categories. They returned only 4 starters, lost 7 guys in the portal, added another 5. You look at the defensive line, the edge department features Isaac Smith, 6'6", 260 with no reps to his name. Charles Esters was good, but will need to step up. Amir Washington didn't see the field a season ago. Joseph Adadiri was an above-average player. Dylan Spencer figures to be a promising player as a true sophomore. Good amount of depth in terms of players on the roster, but no real proven difference makers. Interior defensive line returns Quincy Leddit, who was a solid run defender. Same can be said about Amirian Banks at 6'5", 305 pounds. Trevon McAlpine will need to be better in a backup role. 6 foot 300. DeBrylin Carroll from Rice has been a phenomenal run stopper in his career. James Hansen from Nevada, on the other hand, being a low-quality rotational piece. The defensive line loses some high-value players with this team collectively already struggling against the run. It certainly leads you to think they're going to regress. Guys like Jalen Hutchins, Miles Cole, Tony Bradford, and then Steve Linton, some guys in the front 6/7, Nick, that were very good for them. And again, they still struggle despite having some nice talent. So what's the expectation here?
certainly a little concerned about what this offensive line can do because they do lose some solid players. Charles Esters, 26 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks for him last year. Joseph Adalrian, 25 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, and 1 sack for him. Amarion Banks, 15 tackles, total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, and then Trevon McAlpin down there in 8 games. He had 11 total tackles, 1 each in terms of sacks and tackles for loss. He was playing a little hurt last year. He's a guy coming off the edge. I think has potential to grow as a player this year. I think he could be a good player for this team. Quincy Ledet is a guy I like to see a lot of improvement out of at nose tackle. 20 total tackles last year for him, plus a forced fumble. He needs to be more physical, get in there and stuff the run. He's a big body who I think can really develop and be stronger for this team. He's a senior leader, one of the more veteran players on the team. Want to see more of him this year.
Good news for them is they have a pretty respectable linebacking group led by Ben Roberts, who's a really good player in the middle as a run stopper, efficient tackler. He was a complete standout in his first year. Jacob Rodriguez got hurt in week 1, didn't return until the final 4 games in the season. Was very impressive, especially in coverage. Nice formidable duo there in the middle. Brian Ramirez wasn't all that good as a backup, but played a good amount of snaps. John Curry didn't see the field at all in his first season. McQuell Dingle did see a couple of snaps and might be able to work his way into the rotation. Again, this isn't the worst linebacking group here. Roberts and Rodriguez as starters behind them, certainly a little bit questionable. But I think they're probably going to get some pretty solid play here out of this 3-3-5. What's the expectation for the linebacking group?
I do like this linebacking core. I think there are some solid pieces here. Ben Roberts is a true freshman last year. 107 total tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, plus a pick. Returning your top returning tackler as such a young player who could really continue to grow. That's a really good thing to see. I think he's a guy that's a really solid linebacker. Want to see him get above that 100 tackle mark again this year. Jacob Rodriguez in 5 games last year had 32 total tackles, so a really nice pace there that he was setting before his injury. A really good player than Bryce Ramirez as well, 21 total tackles in a more rotational role down there at the bottom of the roster, potentially playing at that wide linebacker, competing with Rodriguez, who's still battling for health. So I think this is really solid. You have Ben Roberts, who was, I beg your pardon, was a redshirt freshman last year, but still a guy that is a younger player getting experience at middle linebacker at over 100 tackles. Really nice to return that production.
They look at the secondary, ranked 74th against the pass a season ago. Braylon Lux was the top corner, being impressive around the board and is back to be a leader, despite being pretty undersized at 5'11", 175. Marion Horn saw 100-plus snaps last year, showed some promise and will step in the starting role. Jalen Peoples played a few snaps in a rotational role and should see increased workload. David Cromwell transfers in from a D2 school. Plenty of youth behind them and Macho Stevenson and Miles Thompson. So I think the corner group's kind of iffy at the moment. Safety group features this unit's best player in C.J. Baskerville, who's an elite tackler, really good in coverage, stout against the run. Chapman Lewis enters his second season after seeing 4 games. Was solid and should continue to grow. Jordan Sanford, in his backup role, only had, as a second-year player, only saw 150 snaps. Javion Wilcox, a redshirt freshman who transferred in from TCU. Very young safety group as well, but one I think can really evolve. A.J. McCarty didn't play last season, but saw field a good bit for Baylor back in 2022. As a pretty average player, should fit into the slot. And will compete with Brendan Jordan, who wasn't all that stout, as the primary slot behind Baskerville whenever he's not in that role. This secondary, again, has a lot of youth, Nick. They do have an elite player that can certainly be, a good leader for them. But the concern here is, outside of Baskerville and Lux, there's not many proven commodities, and that could certainly lead to issues.
There certainly does lack that sort of depth of guys who have got great experience. So the Baskerville and Lux are 2 solid players. Baskerville, 78 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 2 picks, 5 pass breakups for him last year. Lux, 40 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, a pick, and 9 pass breakups. Really good coverage asset there. Braden Jordan, 20 total tackles and a pass breakup, and Jordan Sanford had 9 total tackles. In rotational pieces there, they bring in some different players here and there. A.J. McCarthy could be all right this year. Didn't play a whole lot last year. The secondary, I think it's going to be another middle-of-the-road, middle-of-the-pack defense, which really seems to be the story with Texas Tech here. It's just a middle-of-the-road team, a team that's just going to be kind of down the middle in terms of defense and offense. Don't really seem to be jumping off the screen in any of the areas. The defense is going to be okay, but nothing phenomenal.
Looking at the verdict here for the side of the ball. Red Raiders' D-line wasn't all that bad talent-wise last year, and the pass rush was quite solid, but this year's D-line isn't as polished. Linebacking group features a strong, impressive duo. His secondary has a few stout players and overall promising upside with the youth. From a numbers standpoint, this defense is one of the best had in a while. And I like them to improve even more, even though, looking at the roster probably suggests they won't. I think Tim DeRuiter is a good defensive coordinator, and I certainly think this staff is going to be able to coach these guys up into a middle-of-the-pack defense, kind of like you said, Nick. That's really all they need. Look at the final prediction for Texas Tech. The Red Raiders are building a great program, in my opinion. I love this coaching staff. the facilities in Lubbock are incredibly underrated, even allowing them to land that 5-star Micah Hudson. Offense returns a great running back in Taj Brooks, improved offensive line. Rest of the supporting cast somewhat average alongside a QB that struggled to produce, but should certainly improve. And again, defense on the other hand continues to make strides and becoming much more comfortable and competitive in this conference. It's a hard team to predict overall, especially with the uncertainty at quarterback, Nick, but they can compete with most teams here. I'm going to go for modest 6-6. I certainly think you're going to see some inconsistencies overall from the quarterback position. Hot start, led by a couple of losses. And overall, the losses on this team are just better football teams that can certainly go either way. I think this team can certainly win 8 games. I'm just going to pick them to win 6 at this moment. I know you're right on par with me, Nick. I think this is a good team. It's certainly going to provide some scares, especially if you're a team like Arizona or West Virginia, looking to win the conference. That could certainly be an issue for them.
This is a team that's not too bad on paper. I think they have some solid pieces on offense and defense, but I think they're just going to be a middle-of-the-road team. A team that's average. A 6-6 record is pretty average. This team will go to a bowl game again. Will probably win. Probably get to their 4th straight bowl game for this program, which is really something solid here. They won 3 in a row. They're looking to get 4 in a row now. I think they can certainly do that with the 6-6 record. Certainly some tougher draws on the road, right? At Iowa State, TCU, Oklahoma State, and Arizona are all very tough draws. West Virginia, tough draw to close out the season at home. The non-conference isn't very difficult, right? At Washington State's a game you want to keep an eye on. That could be a bit of a trap game. North Texas, that game could be a little bit difficult. Maybe you're sleeping on that game. I think the coaching staff is solid here. Obviously, the recruiting has ticked up a little bit, bringing in a 5-star wide receiver, getting some other talented pieces in that class, top 30 class. So the recruiting's heading in the right direction. I think the coaching staff's heading in the right direction. This is a team that we're about 2-3 years away from them being competitive in the Big 12, in my opinion. If the conference stays the way it is, I do think this is a fun team to watch. Certainly, you should tune in and check this team out if you have some time on a Saturday. I think they're worth a watch with some of the weapons they have on offense.
It's going to be it for today's episode. As always, Nick, appreciate you joining. We're breaking down the Red Raiders, an interesting yet underrated team that I think certainly moving in the right direction as a program.
Looking forward to watching this team this year.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.